Good morning, handsome.
Good to see you again, Kurt.
How was your week off?
It was uneventful pretty much. It's like baby's comfortable where baby is, no baby, no, okay. And it's like I expected that kind of. It's just fine. We just remain calm and keep on pulling the oar. Things get weirder and weirder, and now there's a war going on in the Ukraine. It's just like, well, okay, what next?
Well, I got a question for you because this has always troubled me as a unsentimental male. I've never. There's all this woman stuff that has to go on in families, and I have no idea why the men are supposed to go to them. Like this child caring, mothering stuff that's got to go on. It's like they've got to have us there, but to feel good about that everybody's around, but they still consider us annoying.
Well, we are. I understand. I'm like that, just like arm candy or something like that, right?
Is that all it is? Because I don't really.
Candy. It's like, and you might provide some utility there as well. You never know. Something might happen that requires a strong back and a weak mind. Right? And that's like happy to be of service. I'm happy to be here, right?
It's like it's really I really can't get over it of like in my because my family had big family gatherings, so the men would always end up somewhere and the women would always end up somewhere, and we would talk about man stuff and they would talk about, and we would have fun, right?
Right.
And we would talk about man stuff, and then we would be laughing, and they would talk about what I consider the usual silly female stuff, which is meaningless, which is what they think of male stuff too, right? And so they would come in and always be disappointed or angry that we were having fun without them.
Yeah.
Right. Or that we were doing that we were perfectly happy watching the Thanksgiving football game,
doing nothing.
Absolutely thrilled, doing nothing. And so, and it's got to that, and also in life, it's like you run into these things where it's like, why do I need to be there? You're just going to show emotional support to other women, which is okay, right? I mean, I understand that, but I have no value. I'm going to be twiddling my thumbs. Everything, not just me, like as a man, like every man, right? And we're going to be, we're basically what we consider wasting our time, and you don't like us there, right? You actually don't want. You would, the reason you want us there is because you want us to act like women, right? You want to increase your numbers, and so we can't act like women. We don't act like women, and so you don't like it. So there's some gratification they get out of having all of us around, even though men don't behave the way, just like women don't behave in politics the way we want them to. Men don't behave in family or social groups the way that women want them to.
That's it.
And so it used to be so then it getting worse in business is that, I've got something that involves big money or big stress or loyalty things or have consequences. And then the woman brings up something like going to visit these friends who are having a little party, and it's like,
right. I understand you.
It's like this is an extremely poor use of my very scarce time. When what we men really need, we need that time. We're sitting around watching the football game, we're playing a video game, we're reading a book, or fire gazing or hunting, because right, we need that thing to get to this state of mindfulness because of all the other stuff that's in our heads. Well, women don't get that because they don't systematize, so they can't see the greater model, right, that we're all running around within our head, or even appreciate it if they had. We can't see the stuff they fuss about either, right? We can't see all the chaos in their heads either. But for most of the time, that chaos is really nonsense.
I know. So the way I work this out in my mind is I just view it as watching a fire, right? It's just like watching a fire, and it's like, it's a different kind of fire, and it's just a social fire that doing random things, and I just
That's a great.
It's okay. It's like, then look, I'm just recharging. I'm not doing anything, man. I'm just doing like this. Hey, Brad, look, I'll do
Yeah,
it.
that's why that's why most mature men fall asleep at these gatherings.
So what's interesting is, so I noticed this because we have large family gatherings as my nieces, they are obligated to engage they're trying to engage in the masculine fashion with the wrong tools, which is the woke tools, man. Don't bring that to the discussion in polite conversation, because it will get ugly. And they stopped. It's okay. It's okay. So I was
Anyway,
in this line of thought. It's like what I thought of over the week. I'm saying I'm warming you up still. I thought about this over the week. There's the fourth turning talks about these 4 generational cycles as occurring, and it's like, okay, that's a fairly decent model. It's not a bad model, and it looks.
I mean, it's as old as the Romans, right? And history says it's true because history cycles fall the same, and so do business cycles. So, I mean, why wouldn't express and generate? There's no different in a generational production cycle than an economic production cycle or an institutional production cycle. So, of course, these things are going to fall. We think of it like it must be mysterious. No, it's fucking deterministically obvious. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. So it's like this. So I'm like this. Here we are at the Quigley will call it the age of crisis, which is where we're at. And it keeps on getting worse. The compression just keeps increasing. It's like, okay, more pressure is being added to the system to make everyone uncomfortable so that the evolutionary outcome will happen. Everyone needs to want to move there because it's going to suck here so bad that you're going to want to overcome the inertia that is required to get over the hump. So what I was thinking about it, what the French would call it, the fin de cycle, right? And here we are at the end of this cycle, and the cycle I've named it to be the post-war liberal settlement. Okay, and it is what has happened is, so about 1932 is when the New Deal and the great lies that are now becoming rotten were told and believed, and then increasingly divergent from observed reality or sensed reality. Now we're here at the lies are so obvious that there's checks flying in the wind that are never going to make it to cash. It's not going to happen. So promises were made that will not be fulfilled, and everybody knows it, and everybody's scrambling up like to figure out how are we going to plug this up so that I don't lose all my stuff that I earned, that is nowhere. I never had it in my possession, but I had presumed that I was going to get it later because of the benefits that I accrued while I was working my tail off for the last 50 years or whatever it was. So it's like, what it occurs to me is that they generate believable stories at the beginning of the cycle that then go bad. And now we're to this stage where they're madly attempting to cobble together the lies that will pander to enough people to cause them to subscribe to the new lie that is to come, that they wish to be in charge of so that they can control this evolutionary process. That's
so you're saying there's a lot, what they would call a narrative cycle, we call a lie cycle.
Well, sure. Some would call it like a movie, like an entertainment idea. It's like whatever, what to cause the people to entrance the people, to cause them to be enthralled, right, for another 4 generations. And it's like
it's what they call, what's his name? He's an adequate thinker. I can't remember his name.
That we call.
He looks. No, he's a young. Well, no, he's a young guy, and he's trying to work his way into producing a think tank like ours, and he produces good quality videos. He is good. He looks Polish to me. He has a very good presentation, but he's not Polish. He's from Southern Europe. He's got a great presentation. He thinks clearly, but somewhat immaturely. Always young, and he calls it the great founder theory, which is really that some group of founders produce a narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And you get to anthropomorphize, right, some founders and the narrative that they bring about. And there's a life cycle to the success and failure of the narrative, like there would be to any other theory. So I mean, essentially any narrative of the good, right, for any group of people is imprecise, sufficiently imprecise. It may have the ability or inability to adapt, right, to change, and it will either include principles that are durable or principles that are less durable, but it will eventually run out against the problem of all theories, is their degree of precision is no longer sufficient
Right.
for the information at hand. And at that point, what's usually happened is that the tendency of all organizations, including social, including business, including social, political, institutional, civilizational, all those systems tend to maximize rent seeking by the members, such that a shock occurs and the incentives cannot be produced to adjust their behavior without their failure. And so what happens is you end up having collapses or wars. This is what we call in the West, the deep state problem, is because the quote, race Bolsheviks have taken the majority, or the race Marxists. Lindsay is casting it as race Marxists.
Yes.
So I'm going to go with Lindsay's take so that I can help create a definition. I don't care which one it is: race Bolsheviks, race Marxists, postmodern PC woke. I don't. Russians call them just liberals. That's just what liberal means, is a race Bolshevik or a race Marxist. That's just what the Russians interpret liberalism as meaning. Of course, we think liberalism, we just think of Jeffersonian democracy and Jeffersonian law, institutions and law. But when we do, that's what we mean liberalism. When we think of liberals, we're talking about socialists and democratic socialists and communists, and general leftists. And of course, the Russians see it the opposite way. They just see, they've used the word liberalism or liberalism as the permissiveness that makes it possible for race or Marxist race Bolsheviks and the left in general to obtain power to cause degeneracy in the civilization. So the Russians are actually right in their interpretation of what's wrong with the West, right? But of course, their solution isn't the right one. Which is a problem.
Yeah, I'm not trying to justify the Russians and their behaviors. I understand them, but I don't have to agree with them.
Well, I mean, people don't have to be all right. They can, you can have 10 basic beliefs. 9 of them are tragically wrong, but one of them is exhaustively right. I mean, I wrote a piece, I won't talk about it here because I'll make another video on it, but I wrote a piece which I think is the definitive piece on Russian behavior. And they're not right, but they're not wrong. Right? I mean, it's what they're doing is immoral and can be handled by better means, but they're not capable of better means.
All right. So back to my cycle story here.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, it's okay.
I wanted to just.
It's okay.
The problem I have is people think when you talk like that, there isn't, and if you say, well, you bring up something like generations, right? Like as if it's just this thing out of the air. It's not. Right? It's a fundamental scientific principle of all human organizations, right? That's all I was trying to say is, this guy who's about to tell you the story about generations, this isn't something just out of the air that's an analogy. It isn't just a way of thinking.
Right. So it goes like this, is at the end of the cycle, I call the Tower of Babel issue, which is that we appear to be coming to a point where that they're attempting to cause the new narratives are being offered up and rejected. And it's like the climate change story, the COVID-19 story, and the Black Lives Matter racial identitarianism are soundly rejected, in my opinion, but not quite. There's still some air left in their lungs. Okay. And it goes like this, but it increasingly at the end of the cycle, and this is like the end of the cycle of cycles. So Tower of Babel is like the lies have to pander to smaller groups, and they're increasingly obvious to all other groups that they're a lie. So that the liars become more evidently liars as opposed to crafty narrative generators, right?
Mhm.
Which is to say, they're not convincing. Not enough. There's not enough convincing cohesion of narrative that they're generating. There's no correspondent cohesive narrative that they're generating that acts as glue, because that would be like the truth, and they don't want to do that.
Let me science that a little bit to prove how right you are. So one of the things that let's talk about the evolution of a theory, right? So expressing a theory, it's a very imprecise theory. So what that theory does is those theories do always is state a believable half truth, right? The problem is that the reason it works is it's open to suggestion.
Right.
In other words, each individual group can substitute its own fantasy to believe that this general rule applies to their specifics, right? A general rule apply. So I always take the libertarian one, which is the most sophomoric there possibly could be, which is it's the non-aggression principle. Okay, but what does aggression mean to you, and what does it mean to me and somebody else? Sure, we can. It makes sense if you mean bash me on the head or take my stuff, but there aren't any problems. There are no political problems solved at that scale. We don't have any dispute over. We have dispute over the problems beyond that scale, right? Where people differ. So libertarianism uses this concept of suggestion to create a false consensus that fails under increasing demand for precision. Well, that's what's happened to the left. It's created a false promise of freedom from the physical, behavioral, evolutionary, and logical laws, which we've been over 1,000 times now. The audience doesn't need to hear it, but and that's really good in the beginning, because everybody can say, well, then it'll end up being good for me this way. Except that what they have to do is, as they succeed, is they gain power, it becomes visible that those needs and wants aren't the same, they're individual, which basically means they've contradicted the entire premise of their foundations, which is they've lied by suggestion, leaving open the imprecision that allows the individuals to suggest that this vague unifying principle actually is going to serve his particular interest when there's no chance it can. And the reason is always because those people have particular interests, and the only way to solve particular interests is markets. And it's not equality, because every attempt to equality is actually at the cost of somebody else who would be better off without this group aggregate.
Right.
So to science it, we can science this entire process all the way down to the bottom. And so what you're saying is just true. It's just lying by a general theory of abstract precision that fails under application, right, over time as we gain more knowledge, thus exposing that the initial premise of equality is always part of it, right? It's to try to create a family out of polity, right? You're always trying, they're always going to fail. Every single time they fail. The only time they succeed is if you're already desert poor peasants. And what you're going to succeed then is keeping yourself all desert poor peasants. Whereas the other answer is let 1,000 nations bloom. Because then you have internal needs for status, self-reward, and mindfulness. And you have external requirements for production, distribution, and trade. which meaning that your social and individual identitarian membership always is sedated because you're never feeling left behind within your tribe, right? In other words, it's just a serotonin producer, right? And which makes you free of negative thoughts. And so this is why we value communities of similar identity, is because it has the least negative, least threat of ostracization because of our differences. So, I mean, let 1,000 nations bloom, build everything out of markets, and everybody can, in fact, be equal in their state of mindfulness, right? Rather than, and relatively equal in their state of status, right? But they are, even if they remain somewhat unequal over time in their material consumption. But people, if we can see from the evidence that people care a lot less about material consumption if they have, in other words, they're far more redistributive if they have ethnic and cultural homogeneity. So the left is always fomenting conflict and demand for authority, which would put them in charge, which would allow them to oppress all these people to create the equality that they can't, when the answer, of course, is to produce as many markets as possible and oppress as many leftists as possible. That would be the best thing.
I like that, sneaking it in, man. That was,
yeah, you let me. I was like,
that was
thinking
well
of,
done.
I was about 2 sentences ahead, and I'm thinking, am I going to say this or not? But I'm going to say it just to get Brad's face.
I saw it. It was pretty good, man. It's like, I saw you sneaking it in. I'm like, look at that guy. He knows what he's doing. He's not even playing. Just, what are you going to do about that one, Brad?
Because a leftist is functionally a person who is behaviorally malfunctioning. In other words, and they're behavioral malfunctioning either because of genetic defect or trauma, or developmental defect, genetic defect, developmental defect, or trauma. And we're got to remember that there's always going to be a subset of the population that can't stand the difference between their perceived self-worth and their demonstrated value to others.
That's right.
There's always going to be people who have neuroticism that's going to amplify that. And there are always going to be people that are cognitively broken, but need the will to live. And they're always going to create crazy stories in their heads.
Right.
You know, and more of those are going to be women, right? And there's always going to be men who rebel against it with criminal behavior. The problem isn't going to go away at that level. The problem is knowing what's wrong with those people is not helping them maintain their status quo.
No, right. No, and what's interesting is those people are useful tools for cynical oligarchs to rally and organize for purposes of turning the tools of oppression against the middle, which might challenge the authority of the oligarchs by legal means.
Dysfunctionals are soldiers of discontent, right? They're the manservants of those who want to create an authority, because they, in their egos, believe they can do better. They do better in creating good than those who are the traditional aristocracy, who do good by eliminating evils. This is the fundamental difference between the two scores. Is, do you think you're doing good? The only way we know you're doing good, empirically, right? Doing good is a theory. Right. The only way we know good is that you've eliminated an evil, right? That you know that because you can see the evil. It's empirically evident, right? You can't do good, right, necessarily knowingly.
That's an interesting premise.
Well, the problem is it's a polar thing, so you got to remember it goes right. So, like, for example, I have a friend, acquaintance, I don't know what to call him. There's a certain kind of Christian I love very much, who I will do anything for. And they're the people who are actually Christians. Like, this guy is he's worked in my, can I say this? Yeah, he worked in my IT department. You know what he did on weekends? He got together with other Christians, found some person in the community that needed help.
Wow.
They'd go to that person's house, they'd clean it, they'd take
Wow.
out, they'd rebuild something that was broken or whatever. And so it was like this, that's a fucking Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't care what you say, you believe or do. That person's a Christian. Right. And so every time, you know, those are Christians through deed, not through belief. Right. And so, you know, I love those guys. And so, you know, that's what he would do. And I'm like, that's doing good. There's no, because it's not intangible. It's not a pretense. It's not at someone else's expense. It's not somebody asking you're actually getting up, you're organizing a bunch of other families or guys. It's usually family, you know, there's a sort of working class of people who do this stuff really good at it, right? And they find somebody in the community who's, you know, usually elderly or something, you know,
Right.
and their house they can't maintain their household, or they, you know, and they go up, in this particular case, they ripped out carpets and they, you know, and they polished floors and they painted and fixed some wiring and plumbing and stuff. But I mean, even if it's just to go to, you know, clean up the mess, right? I mean, because if you're older, you can't go take care of your yard like you used to, right? And so they would do this, or the fucking people. I mean, it's the kind of people that, like, my neighbor would, once I was traveling, they would mow my yard. My yard's the size of like your living room, right? It's not like it's whatever, but they would, or it's probably your house really, but it's really small, right? I mean, it's a 5-minute job, but they would come over and mow my yard, you know, and it's like, that's Christian,
Yeah.
right? You know, getting together a neighborhood to work for, walking the neighborhood to maintain security, that's Christian. You know, all these people that go and they're like, oh, you know, I don't have any respect for that at all. That's not doing it.
No. I'm very excited to get back to helping you finish the law.
I had one issue
What's
I
that?
want to talk about, and I think this will help you. So I want to talk about, that's my topic today.
Okay.
And it's I don't say help you, the audience. I think it'll help you in particular,
That's
right?
good.
Because what I see you having when you have disputes with other people in the movement, I think it's this reason, right? And because you understand the general thing, right? I mean, I sit here and work with you on it, and you get it, right? And so, as we work through things, you get it right all the time. You especially get it right when you're bringing in, like you brought in Quigley today. You get all this all right, but once in a while, you like the vast majority of people I deal with on the triangles.
Right.
We tend to not understand the triangle is the triangle in what we're showing is the triangle, like as the triangle is to geometry. And I use this model for the same reason, is that every measurement in geometry is somehow produced by the use of you know, some derivation of a triangle, even if that triangle is the rectangle, or, you know, the square or whatever. I mean, it's the square being a rectangle being a pair of triangles, so identical triangles. So I'm failing at this, and it's only when I see it in the public, right, once the idea gets out there and how they're not getting it right, that it teaches me how, well, okay, so if they're thinking that, what am I failing to get across?
Right.
And like, you're always teasing me every fucking day, right? I mean, I mean, it's because you're right. I'm a moron, and I can't, well, you know what I mean?
Welcome to the club.
And I just, you know, things that are obvious to me
Right.
aren't obvious, right? And this is the mistake I make all the time in life, right? I think something that's obvious, or an obvious derivation, I think it's obvious, and it's completely not. So I want to talk about we're doing with the triangles, and how they're a system of constructing measurements.
Okay.
And I'm bringing the concept of the triangle over from geometry. In other words,
Right.
I'm not simply using the concept of a stable relationship between two poles. I'm not just doing that. I could do that without bringing in the geometry. But a reason I'm bringing in the triangle is to create a visual representation of that non-visual idea.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense? And so in doing so, I'm trying to create the parallel between the triangle as the means of measuring spatial temporal spatial relations in mathematics and geometry, right, and physics. I'm trying to bring that forward into behavioral sciences.
Okay.
Right. And so in other words, I'm trying to create a constant system of measurement across all disciplines.
Right.
This framing of the universe as triangles, right? Because it shows up as triangles everywhere in the universe, from the structure of our brains to the behavior of our people to the behavior of our, this shows up everywhere. And so I'm trying to use this triangle concept as a way of disambiguating a measure into 3 points.
Okay.
Right. So our triangles, the way we're using them, are a tool that reminds us of the first principle of stable relations, and that we use that first principle of stable relations for disambiguation of anything there is into measurements, not categories, but measurements. So what people seem to want to do is categorize things into familiar ideals and types, thereby destroying the measurement we're trying to produce, instead of trying to construct that stable relation out of a measurement, or excuse me, how to create a measurement that shows the causal relation of that. So what's happening is that instead there's a human tendency to fitting, and fitting is a term. It was like, it's fitting into an analogy, not a description, not a causality, but an analogy, right? Causality, description, right? Description is testimony. An analogy is a story. So it's a familiar story. So they're not trying to give us what they're doing. There's a tendency of humans to take what has the broadest meaning and the greatest number of associations and the greatest familiarity with analogy, not description, and not causality. So this tendency for fitting is logical. You see theological fitting, philosophical fitting, versus unfitting, which is what we're doing. We're unfitting from traditional categories and ideals, right, into measurements.
Unfitting. I'm processing that one. I am having a.
I couldn't think of a better word. I only wrote this 5 minutes before we started.
No, your coffee was still brewing, man.
We'll think of something better, but I mean, it's the opposite of fitting.
So,
right.
Okay, let's just review that for a second, just to make sure I'm not totally smoked here. And it's just fitting. Fitting is analogization
into what you already know.
So categorical fitting.
Yes. Instead of constructing from first principles,
which will be operationally descriptive.
Yes. See, the master has spoken.
Thank
the
you.
Audience will now understand that Dr. Brad has.
Even Brad can get this one. I can hear him clapping.
I watch. I love the way you and I work, right? It's pretty humorous. It's collegial, it's not even collegial. It's more like a bar conversation, right? Or a pub or living room conversation, right? It's right. Fun. And I listen to all these intellectuals now, after you and I doing all this, I listen to all these intellectuals and they sound like so preposterously pompous when they're talking about this stuff. It cracks me up. And most of the time they're saying something that's absolute nonsense. And you're
I understand you.
it's like,
That was a lot of big words there, like soupy, salady, like, okay, that was beautiful. And we're past the Roquefort or something like that, right?
yeah, but it's almost always it's some combination of theology, secular theology, philosophy, and ideology, and there's like a little few coffee grounds of truth in there somewhere. If you sift it.
That's right.
Anyway, so we're sitting. I love that we're talking about very serious and important things, and we have fun doing it.
So I tell you this, and before you get going strong here, is how much work it is hanging out with the guys. It's like how I'm like doing more homework, watching videos, and trying to understand stuff. And I'm like, just hanging out with you guys is just keeping up is wearing me out. And it's okay. I got nothing better to do.
In part, that's because there's a tendency among our guys to speak extremely parsimoniously. So like if you're lucky if you can get a 3-word sentence out of Brandon, once a day, right? I mean, he understands, and when you do, I have to think about what he says, right? So if he says something, I'm like, wait, oh yeah, no, he's right.
Processing, right?
It's so condensed. And Martin, he's the same thing. This is if he speaks in this, it's his Czechoslovak. He has very narrow mouth, very, very low breath Czech accent. I need to teach him, please speak with your mouth open and enunciating. But anyway, but then, when he does that, he says, like, instead of Brandon's 3-word sentence, he has a 6-word sentence, right? I mean, and Luke is like, well, he won't speak a 6-word sentence, he'll speak a 12-word sentence. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, so among us, it's fine, right? Because we know all the first principles, right? But if you're like another person coming in, I'm always amazed when we had like 2 guys this week and say, holy crap, I got it. I get it. I can hold it all in my head.
That's good.
I'm always amazed anyone can.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think it comes down to it's the parsimonious nature of the discourse. There's hidden workings going on in the backfield that are not obvious when in the discourse, yes. And it's like, yes. Yeah, it's important to show your work.
Yes, exactly.
Just saying, it makes a difference. But to the outsiders who are trying to warm up at the campfire here.
That's the answer. Martin shows his work they all can show their work in writing, but they don't show their work in speech, which is really interesting. That's probably the advice they need to hear.
Just show your work a little bit more. It's okay.
Sure, verbal.
It's
when
like
you make a verbal statement. I mean, I do the opposite, right? I go off on these long fucking rants to explain that. Like, I just explained like the 3 things that people wouldn't know that you'd said. I'm like, no, these 3 things Brad just said, that's science. It may sound like to you like it's just something out of here or there, but what he's saying is absolutely positively true, period, end of story, right? But so I go overboard, right? Because this is my nature to see things in the grains of sand, or I see the grains of sand. But I mean, for most people, they just say this stuff, and as long as the meaning gets across and everyone agrees, that's happy. The problem is it doesn't help the audience. And so we get feedback like the people want me to talk more. That's not really the answer. The answer is the other guys need to show their work. And that's another value you just created, is getting the guys to show their work. It's tedious, right? It takes time, but show your fucking work.
I think that it's like this. They just want to make the point and move on. And they're like being parsimonious with their time and their effort. It's like, well, you know what I mean? Boom.
But we don't, that's not why the audience watches.
That's right. That's right.
Right. The audience, if the audience doesn't understand, it doesn't see the work, they aren't getting taught by explaining, by showing the work, then the audience is merely is merely emotionally and psychologically and intuitionistically reacting to agreement with whatever they're implying, what they're saying. In other words, it's just suggestion. So my experience is that what happens is these guys follow for 6 months or a year, or maybe 3 years, in some cases, and all of a sudden a light bulb comes on. But the light bulb seems to come on more from you and me doing this than anything else. But we show the work. That's what you and I do. We show the work. And so maybe that's the best lesson for the guys is when they take up something. I think the tendency for us, because if you watch us, we're us on the Good Guys show, is that we're actually just having fun, right? And maybe we ought to treat it as a job, educating.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, you just identified the real issue.
Thank you.
Anyway, so did you make your point
I'm
about?
happy. I'm happy. I just am like this, so it's like, okay, we're going to talk about fitting and not fitting, unfitting.
Yeah. Now I'm going to be self-conscious every time I use that word.
Sorry.
So it's fitting into an analogy or pre-existing, or fitting, and we're trying to unfit from an analogy into a measurement, right? That's what we're trying to do, and that measurement has to be constructed from first principles, and a first principle means that it's irreducible, it's causally irreducible. So people want to auto associate, right? They want to people want a stepping stone. They don't want to be told that you're still the goal is over the horizon and keep paying attention till you get there.
Right. So I've got your term for you. I think that fitting is clothing, and what we're doing is skeletalizing it, which is how you would describe it if you were making a graphic image. You'd make a skeleton, right? With triangles. That's measured skeletal. So you're reducing it to its skeletal version. There you go. That's
skeletonalizing.
Skeletalization.
Okay, got it.
That's a thought.
That's pretty good. Well, I mean, I was trying to use the reason we use fitting. It comes from the round peg and the square peg in the round hole. You're trying to make the square peg fit in the round hole because that's what's familiar to you, right? I'm just thought of all the shit the guys are going to come up with out of me using peg in the whole fucking analogy. And now my
sorry,
my train of thought's completely lost.
Fuse is blown. Sorry.
So,
okay.
But that's where it comes from. So what it is, of course, is you're supposed to say, oh, I get it. This square peg is made of two triangles. I have to break it apart and put it in the holes for the triangles. I mean, that's the, so I don't know what unfitting or skeletalizing or decomposing.
To its basic elements, right? Skeleton,
Yeah.
To its skeletal form. There you go. Okay, I'm good. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that was really good. So, and it's natural, right? We want to get a win because when we don't understand, we want to take a step forward. We want to unburden the neural economy, right? And so it's rational. People will resort to fitting what they know. So people will say, well, that's sort of like, yeah, well, and then now I got to go and falsify whatever it would sort of like. And they'll say, well, then it's sort of like this, and I got to go falsify what that
sounds like work. That's a lot of
work.
work.
That's what most of it is, right? And most of the time, you're trying to eliminate the 1,000 errors people make because it's the only way to lead them to the truth they can't understand, right? I mean, so you're trying to get people to stop appealing to your intuition and just follow these rules. And so, right, that's all that's going on. And we're trying to teach people the mathematics with basically the geometry, the mathematics, the compositional structure of all human experience, right? And we're trying to give them a system of measurement for doing that. The problem is they always want to cheat.
Yeah.
Right? They want to say, oh, I get it. It's only, this is close enough. Well, no, it actually isn't. It's close enough for meaning, right? but it's not close enough for subsequent induction, deduction, and calculation, right? You're not, it's not possible. So, meaning gets you closer, but it doesn't allow you to induce, deduce, calculate, or compute, right? And so I'm saying, so what you do is when somebody gets that leap, you tell them what's the part that's right about their leap and the part that's wrong. And if you do this enough times, they start, depending how fucking brick-headed they are, you get, excuse me, I'm emoting my lifelong frustration with explaining to normies. What I call the disabled, which means neurotypicals.
That was rude. I didn't want to drink to that. That was perfectly rude.
Oh my God, I must have got sleep last night.
That's awesome. Okay.
I'm sorry, I have to take a little catharsis has to come out now and then. It's just these
Right?
rare moments of
Oh, it's good. I'm here to help you, Kurt.
Of release, emotional
It's the way I
of
look at
decades of frustration.
I look at this effort as a form of therapy, okay?
Oh, I take it as such, and that's why I appreciate you.
That's
so
good. I'm glad to be here and I appreciate the opportunity to be of some
At least the
value.
audience gets a laugh.
Right.
All right. So the again, so you find all these people trying to fit into what's familiar. And we're doing this really hard work of trying to eliminate their ability to fit into what's familiar, right? And instead teach them the geometry, which is equivalent of the geometry of behavior, right? Which is the same thing as geometry of the physical world, which is the same thing as geometry itself of measurement. And it's the same fucking principle all the way across, which is why we say it's the system of universal commensurability across all human experience.
Which is an audacious claim. I love it. It truly is an audacious claim. And it is like, to me, looking at it and understanding how I understand it, it's beautiful. It's just a crystalline structure.
It's elegant.
Little tiny triangles all the way, like on top of the turtle.
Yep.
It's beautiful.
It's elegant. That's what's so beautiful about it. And it's the consistency of it is why we know it's true. It's just, once you have universal explanatory power from a single basic rule, I mean, you pretty much
like I say,
better.
It's an audacious claim that is substantially supported. It's
yes,
unavoidable conclusion.
It's more than it's unavoidably supported. In other words, I can't find an exception, and I've been doing this for a long time.
Right? Crazy world. So I'm sorry to have interrupted you again.
No, I mean, it's freaking awesome. But I mean, this is again the problem you and I have been working on is how do we get this across? So when I started working with you in our once videos, I'm sure I went over, because I know I remember doing it, plus it's in the video, plus it's in the text, saying, well, it's a system, we're creating a universal, a paradigm, vocabulary, grammar, and logic of universal commensurability across all fields of human experience, which we call the sciences, including the formal, which means logical, physical, behavioral, and evolutionary, which of course is the physical is the precondition, the behavioral is the action, and the outcome is the evolutionary is the outcome, and the formal logic is the way we describe the means by which we describe these three different scales of action in time, the consequence of time. So I can say that, but what does that mean to anybody? It's absolutely true. It's pretty parsimonious, right? But what does that mean? Right? I mean, paradigm of first principles, vocabulary, grammar, and logic, right? So, I mean, you say, well, I mean, if I say it, it's like I might as well come from Mars. I mean, Mars is kind of off the map now, but let's pick another one, Alpha Centauri or something.
Right.
I might as well be a fucking alien, right? And it's more alien than Darwin was. I mean, Darwin was a comparatively simple argument, right? This is right, and it only invalidated like some of your theological, and it didn't even necessarily do that. It says it said, well, that just means that God wrote the laws of evolution, right? I mean, that's all it did. So the worst it did is it invalidated some of the church's dogma, which the church could still have claimed, well, we were right as we could be at the time.
That's
Right.
right.
I mean, right. And
The
so,
precision of the ages.
right. I mean, it's just,
And
duh,
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Darwin, for correcting our error.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they should have done, of course. It's like, oh yeah. Well, God is, God is revealed incrementally because we learn to understand the word of God. So, so then we get it. The problem though is that what we're saying here is that your intuition, which you depend upon for everything other than a heartbeat and breathing, is brought into question, right? I mean, the scale of what we're bringing into question is huge. And moreover, once you understand our ethics, right, it means that your moral intuition is just your advertisement for your terms of cooperation. It doesn't mean you're right. It just
say that again. That was beautiful.
Your moral intuition is just your advertisement, your billboard for the terms of your cooperation. That's all it is. It doesn't mean it's right. It means it's a component of this distribution, triangular distribution of the feminine, the masculine, right, and the equilibrium. So
it's a virtue signal. Why you want to work with me?
It's just an advertisement. Virtue signaling is a negative. It's like,
okay.
It's a virtue signaling means false advertising. Right. I mean, in other words, if
I respect that. That's so, but I like it as advertisement. That works.
It's just, here's the term. So you're walking around as you're saying this is right. You're actually saying, trying to impose upon others, this is what I want. What you want is probably what you need. In other words, it's very often what you need. It doesn't. So in other words, your moral intuition for you is probably something you need, or at least you desire, right? It's very, right? And so, but that's all it is. It's just, but you're only like one dot on this vast triangle of people with different advertisements, and all you're doing is you're like a pachinko ball moving through the local population, trying to find others whose terms you meet, right? Which is what we do. We sort into people who have like terms of cooperation,
right?
The problem is that it doesn't scale, is that now once you have whatever you want doesn't scale. Only thing that scales is markets for the more people getting what they want from larger numbers of people without actually having to know them interpersonally.
Right.
And so this is, but finding people to cooperate with me is hard. I'm like, well, it's because you don't have any value.
Rough. That was a rough one. That was
right.
rough.
So, how do you get value? It's usually by habituating putting some other people's needs ahead of your wants ahead of yours, and fulfilling them in exchange for something, or that you need to ally with other people to work in groups so that you can provide value that other people can't provide, or that you
interesting.
Ask for help from others so that you can get the help to be above, because what people want is terms of cooperation very often is someone to help, because what they're really looking for isn't a material good. It's that they want to feel responsibility and value. So it's all really easily understandable if you just see it as a bunch of us as little marbles running around with advertisements on our foreheads saying, I need this, and I'm offering this, and somebody else saying, you know what, I'll feel better if I help you, because otherwise I'm rejected by these people who are rejecting me. But you won't reject me, so I get mindfulness out of it. So, but that's what we think, that's what responsibility means, right? It means that we get mindfulness. We get mindfulness by the fact that we found value for ourselves.
What's interesting is that this is paradoxical in a way, because it's like the issue is you, I'm making notes here. So I'm typing and talking and writing and too many.
Yeah, I know the problem.
And it's like, so the issue is that you think you are going to provide some value, when in fact the world itself you must adapt to will tell you what value you may bring to bear, which
Yes.
they may be and probably are divergent, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would like to be a basketball player. I'm 5'7". Now that I'm over 60, I'm rapidly approaching 5'6".
Right. And it's like, but if you could be a basketball player, you would be very valuable because it's such a rarity to have such
Right. And it's like, I can't be a basketball player. It's like I can hit a ball, well, a serve really hard, right? When I play tennis. But the fact is, I can't cover the court. I'm too small.
I understand.
Right. And so I can make that ball go really fast right over the net and dip down, and I will hit it every time. Doesn't matter, because if I don't get you on the first serve, I'm dead. Right. I mean, I can't cover the fucking court. I got a 29-inch inseam. Right. I mean, like a stride for me is like I got to take 3 steps for the tall guy.
Right. So to me, it's interesting because it's like do my work on the online work, right? It's very repetitive, and so it gives me a lot of time to introspect and see, because if there's an error, if we have a problem, I regard it as my problem. Because it's like, how did I make that go sideways, that interaction? Because it should be just pretty straightforward, and I'm trying to help you. And it's like, it's how do I help you? How can I be of service to you today is all I'm interested in. And I ran into a guy that caused me, he irritated me sufficiently because he was mad. He was mad at his insurance company. He wanted me to fix his insurance company, and I can't do that. And he was mad, and he was ranting at me, and ended up going, you could do better. You don't have to work for this place. And I'm like, I'm not here to discuss my employment. And 2, you're sufficiently irritating that I no longer want to interact with you.
Yes.
And I'm going to make sure you don't have to charge, because I don't want to hear about it from admin. We'll see if we'll see, because it's like I'm trying to cover the court, right?
Yeah.
Just like you. And it's okay. It's okay, because you can't help all the people.
So it's like I usually use a short thing because it's a thing that people make fun of, and I don't know, I don't get it, because I'm perfectly happy being my height. I mean, for some reason, women who are 5'7" and 5'8" seem to like me. I just don't get that. It's uncomfortable for me, but whatever. Right? I just don't understand. But anyway, and so, but the point is, it's a way to illustrate that you have to provide the value that the market
They want
that you can that they want, and you can deliver.
That's right. That's right. And my ideals and my ideas have nothing there.
I remember being in high school and people saying, well, I want to be like a DJ or something like that. I'm like, why do you want to choose to be something that people would do for free? Right. And so a DJ.
Yeah, I know, but it makes the guy who wants to do it go,
yeah, why do something? Or they would always pick something that they understand, but the fact that they understand it because they're in high school means that it's no value, because it means it's easy to understand. So you get it's fucking thankfully you can make money producing video games like you can, and it's bigger than the freaking movie industry now. But I mean, it's the same thing with the movie industry. Why would you want to do something that means you're going to live in poverty? I just don't understand it. Basically,
don't try to understand it. You might hurt yourself.
Yeah, it's like I got a scholarship 2 years in a row for being the most likely to become a practicing artist. And I'm like, I'm not going to turn this down, but I have no intention of being poor.
Just saying, that's not on a list of things to do this lifetime. I'm with you.
So it's like, I'm like, why do you want to do something that makes you poor? It's like studying fine art for me was essentially studying philosophy, right? And so I did it because I wanted to be the person I wanted to be, right? That's all, right? That was the only reason to go there. Because once you understand that once you get out of college, whatever degree you have is completely fucking irrelevant.
That's for all you guys that are looking to drop to 50K this year.
Yeah, I would actually argue that the only two disciplines, there's only 2 or 3 disciplines that you actually learn anything in. Believe it or not, it's art history, right? Is philosophy, art history, philosophy, which gets you to law, right? And art history is spiritual. It's essentially kind of spirituality.
Yeah.
At least it was for me. It still is. I don't know if I put that into words before, but that's really where my spirituality comes from. Philosophy gets you to be a lawyer, right? Computer science, engineering gets you to be an engineer, and computer science gets you to be a physical engineer and an informational engineer. Okay, everything else is a jobs program. And I'm not sure there's anything. Oh no, I forgot certain branches of chemistry, particularly anything to do with petrochemicals, because that you want to talk about magic.
Yeah.
That's that whole business. That's fucking magic. I mean, it's like if there was a magic rock in the medieval era, right? Oil turns out to be the magic rock.
It's the Philosopher's Stone, man. We can make anything out of that.
It's unbelievable what you get out of dead trees.
Fascinating. All right.
So if we haven't, I haven't really gotten through this point yet. Is it okay if I continue with the triangles?
Absolutely. You want to share your screen? I made you the host.
I'd rather you and I talk so I can because
That's
otherwise fine. The audience, they prefer to see us engaging, and me, I'm sort of pseudo narrating a paragraph.
Okay.
So again, the point of producing the logics, right? The first principles of the logics, meaning the grammars, meaning the spectrum of ways we have of talking about the world, and from very precise to very ambiguous to dishonestly.
Talking about the world,
I always love it. I don't do Victorian philosophy. I do law. That means that you guys stop at where things are good and okay, and I keep going all the way to what's criminal. That's why they don't want to talk to me, is because I end up in your state. You're actually involved in a crime. And so they don't have all the outs that they've got with other people who talk in philosophy.
They find that to be kind of unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean,
talking about criminality. It's like, whoa. It's like,
well, and the guys say, well, we're not helping by calling these people liars. I'm like, well, they are. They don't mean to intend to lie, but they're carriers of lies. So performatively, by either lying by intent or lying by failure of due diligence not to carry a lie, distribute a lie, you're still producing a lie one way or the other.
The guys are right, by the way, right? They're right, and it's like it's politically incorrect to state that.
Well, but that's one of the reasons for bringing it up all the time, is because it's a shock to the system that forces you to understand that a failure of due diligence is equal to a failure of intent. A failure of due diligence is equal to an intent. Yeah. Because the law doesn't care about your intentions; it cares about responsibility.
Right. Okay.
So the point of producing the first principles of the logics, meaning the grammars, the first principles of the physical world, the physics, the first principles of the psychological world, the individual world, the first principle of the cooperative world, and the first principles of consequences of group cooperation, which is evolution, is to memorize those 4 sets of rules and always and everywhere construct the description of causality from first principles, so very specifically, so that we don't engage in fitting, so that we don't engage in an analogy. because every analogy opens up the opportunity for conflation, inflation, and deceit and suggestion by induction, deduction, and falsity in calculation and computation. So we're trying to force people into using proofs of constructability from first principles in order to not state what's true, but to eliminate what's false.
Right.
It just turns out that the degree of precision we're using in eliminating falsehood leaves very few opportunities for truth claims other than the truth.
Right.
So
it's falsification construction.
Right. It's
constructing for to detect falsification.
Yes, it's called versus a verbal logic. It's called a constructive logic.
Okay.
Words, verbal and set logic versus operational constructive logic. So the information content of verbal is open to inflation, conflation, and failure of first principles, failure of premise, failure of failure of conflation, inflation, deception, failure of induction, deduction, calculation, and computation. So the reason verbal logic went nowhere is because there's not enough information for what we call closure, which we call falsification. And instead, an operational logic from first principles is a complete method of falsification. In other words, we can eliminate, if you can construct something from the one first principle, it may not be true, but it's not going to be false. And that's important. It's at least not false. It may be a truth candidate. It's either undecidable or a truth candidate, but it's not, right? So it's not false. So this is different because most people are trying to make excuses, justifications, right? And so they use all sorts of lies and logics and pseudo logics and deceits and whatever, inflations, conflations, I don't want to go through the whole series again, but
fitting.
You're right. They want to fit into what allows them to construct a deceit that violates the first principles. So that's why we ended up with the 20th century, meaning there is no such thing as justificationary logic, as Popper, right? There's only falsificationary logic. In other words, there's no truth content to justificationary logic. There may be meaning content to it. In other words, you might be able to explain why you got there, but it doesn't create any truth value. Whereas falsificationary logic creates truth value by eliminating all possible falsehoods. What we've done is produce the most parsimonious means of complete and total falsehood across all human experience and all the sciences. So it's pretty hard to make a truth claim under our criteria and have it survive if it isn't at least undecidable or a truth candidate. I mean, some things are undecidable. I mean, they're undecidable in the sense that, well, we just don't know. We may know all these things are false, right, or incomplete, but we don't know the answer. I mean, physics is the great example of it. Are we ever going to have enough information to figure out how the universe started or is going to end? I would think so, but I don't know. It's undecidable
at the moment.
Right? It doesn't mean it doesn't mean it is in the future it will be undecidable. It just means in the present it's undecidable. But we can, however, tell you what claim you can't make. You can't make the claim that it began this way or it'll end that way. You can only say it's undecidable. This is a theory and it's undecidable. And the difference is, since it's undecidable, it means you can't coerce people into acting that way. Whereas if it's an adjudication on truth or falsehood of a crime, whatever, then we can force people into action because it's decidable, right? So we can resolve a dispute or difference. But if you come out and say, well, this is the answer and whatever, and it's embarrassing, right? I mean, it was a great video. I watched it. It finally came out yesterday with Bernardo Kastrup, who was a fucking psychological lunatic, and he's a fucking idiot. And Sabine Hassenfelder, which is, two other people I consider closest to my frame of reference, right? And she's like being really kind to him when she should have mopped the floor with him and put his career to end forever. I would have put his career to end, right? Because I would have taken it from philosophy to law, right? And then I would have positioned him as a criminal, which nobody likes, of course, but it was the correct answer. But this guy is someone who's had mental illness problems his whole life, and he's open about it. And so he's looking for and something that doesn't require him to have agency. And so he's smart enough to create sophistries all day long, and he's got a need for somehow to be this supernatural agency in the universe. So all this stuff is coming into it, and it's so obvious to any of us who've studied it's like studying, you have to study a lot of religions and to understand religion. Like, unfortunately, my friend Dave has passed on, but he's a super nerd about religions. I think I've mentioned him in the past. He built a computer program for all the differences in religions, right? I mean,
Wow.
Phenomenal. And he could recite all this stuff. I mean, it's quite amazing, really, and recite all this stuff off the top of his head. One of those guys that shows that musician, computer programming, and thinking are very related activities.
Right.
And I wish there was another guy like that, because I don't know nobody I can call on that has that depth of analytic knowledge about the subject matter.
Right.
That doesn't have to bring that can say, well, they're just trying. He would just say, well, in Buddhism you do this, and in Hinduism you do this, in this generation of Hinduism, so these thinkers you do this, and
Wow.
China you do this, and and he would just go through every single freaking one of them, and you're like, and he was still a believer.
Wow.
In all of them. It's like, no, it's just, and there's guys like that out there, and they're always such super nerds that they can't communicate well enough for their ideas to get out to the populace, and they don't really care. Because what happens is you sort of lose your patience trying to talk to neurotypicals, because it's so burdensome and it's so futile, right? That you just give up.
No, that's why they pay me so much money. Because it's like adapting to how people really are, right? And it's okay. I can understand it's a burden. It can be a burden, and it's like I feel it, because you run into these. Because it's fairly straightforward. I am here to help you with a problem. What's your problem? How can I help you?
Yes.
And I recognize the difference between, because some of them are like, oh, you just kind of like,
Yes.
Get ready. And it's like, wow, because it's going to be work. It's okay. But I can understand it if you're running a finely tuned Swiss watch up here that you don't need the upsetting the gear.
I don't even want to have to empathize with those people, because it's so disturbing to me. It's like I used to give people relationship advice, which for a guy who's been married 3 times, I suppose isn't.
So it's a sign of a slow learner, in my opinion.
Well, that's how I'm like, dude, I've done everything fucking wrong. How can I tell you? It's just that among the things I did wrong, I did things right. I did some things right. So I know what's right and what's wrong. And
a hard way to
probably
learn.
you probably tried 5 things in your life, and I've tried 500,000. And
it's different varieties of trauma. Okay,
yes.
just.
But in the end, it's just, what's the truth, right? I mean, that's all it is. It's like, what's the truth, and what are you trying to get from each other? What's the exchange you're trying to produce? Is it possible? And almost all the time, the problem is getting to the truth, because the people don't know it themselves.
Right.
And so, but I stopped doing it because it was so, it wasn't rewarding. It was actually disturbing. And so, I liked it because most of the time when people come to me, they're arguing against me. What I liked relationships is people were working with me. And so I like to have that part of my life where I could say, well, because it's just the same shit we're doing here, right? I mean, any
That's right.
therapist can learn P-Law and radically improve their ability to work with their patients. So, I mean, you've said it yourself, right? It helps you learn, helps you with talk to your patients.
I've adjusted my understanding is more clear,
Yes.
and it makes it easier to figure out what's going on, because it's like it reduces down to you go back to the skeletalization. It's
Yes.
like, what's really going on here is like, okay, that's easy, man. Right?
Yeah. It's just easier. So, but so I liked that, because most of these morons that come out of the woodwork and they argue with me, and I'm like, the problem is I have to filter through 50 morons to find the one guy who actually is intellectually honest, who wants to make one step forward. Right. And so every time I argue with some idiot, I get a little better at understanding the idiots. Does that make sense? Sorry, you didn't like me saying that, did you?
No, I understand. No, I don't have a problem with that. It's just there's a resistance. There's a certain resistance to it's a closed-mindedness, doctrinaire functioning through that person. They're possessed by something and that they don't recognize.
Yes, I like that. I love your way of approaching this. If I could, it's like we need somebody to specialize in that point of view. I can't do that without mixing frames, but we need a person who speaks in that frame, because that frame takes away the responsibility of the individual, right? Which is what you need in order to give it up and transition. I don't think I can do that. If you could do that.
I do what I do. And
well, I mean, it's really important to say you're possessed by an idea.
And what's very fascinating, because I had a chat with a young fellow that worked for me in the past this week, and I'm talking to him and trying to help him solve his personal problem, and then he transitioned into idealistic world problem solving, and I'm like, you're substituting this world problem solving to not adapt to your personal problem solving. And it was like, it caused me to recognize the idealism versus the empiricism.
Yes.
And he was being idealistic, and it's like, okay, you're going to get pummeled for a while until you figure it out, because it's
like an addict, right? An addict only changes when they crash.
And this is it. And it's like, goes to see well sitting, right? Well sitting is you're just sitting in a well, and it's like there's every way out is in higher inertia than staying where it causes you to sink back in it. And it's like the only way to move from the well is to be uncomfortable at the well. Mm-hmm. That will make you move when you're sufficiently uncomfortable. So there you have it. That's it, basic principle, skeletalization of it.
I mean, I'm trying to think of a way to summarize all the truth you just laid out, but I don't think I can do it better.
Well, it's interesting because it's like I study this people, because it's like the what causes you to move is you're either going to gain something or you're going to remove some discomfort, right? That will cause you to move, and everything else is not going to cause you to move because it's not interesting enough.
Every unhappiness I find in life is due to wanting other people to act in your interest against their interest, and being disappointed when they don't. And that's really it. And there's nothing more to it than that.
Simple enough.
I think that a lot of the mindfulness in our group of Plaw is that we no longer have that expectation of anyone. And so part of the mindfulness we have is from explanatory power. And part of the mindfulness is we don't expect people to act differently from how they do. We only think about how to engineer incentives that would serve them better. We don't We don't think about how do I convince you, or what pitch do I got to come up. It's like, what incentives need to be in place in the structure of society, polity, economy, and state to produce the maximum opportunity for every individual to succeed, and for those who can't to succeed, at least to be insured.
Right.
That's all we think about. We don't ever look at the world as they should. We might look at women and the left as saying they're fucking nuts, but we don't assume they're going to act any differently. What?
I'd say that's it. I don't. It's like that. Yeah. If you're expecting something different to happen, you're a nut, right?
It is what it is. It's going to act like what it is, and it's not going to act any differently. And once you understand that covering the surface area of that triangle is the reason we're different, because that maximizes adaptive opportunity independent of circumstance, then you realize that we're, people look at, we're not ants. Well, yeah, we sort of are, except that there's a billion fucking different variations on ant among us. And, at least they only vary in this triangle. But I mean, within the sphere of the triangle, that we're all some combination of these things at some point in our lives. And
right.
All we're doing is computing the maximum number of opportunities available in the universe. Right. And that's all. And some of us are more predisposed to compute a benefit of opportunity in this circumstance than others. But if we're thrown back 50,000 years of evolution, some of us might be predisposed to do better in that circumstance. But covering the whole point is we cover this triangle, and some of us specialize in seduction, some in force, some in reciprocity, and everything, any combination in between. And there tends to be this sweet spot in the middle where we sort of have most people try to get along because they're not specializing, they're just getting along.
Right.
So
yeah, it is. It's very interesting. The interesting function of it is it's like the people prefer to well sit and rent.
of course.
As you and the adaptation is costly. Adaptation is a costly effort. Like I say, hanging with the crowd that I hang with is like keep on having to study just to keep up and trying to make myself understand what's happening and how to perform within this environment.
I just my observation is the one you've already mentioned, is that the group has two things. That one is that they don't show the work. The second is they've developed an audience of other equally unhappy people that they're trying to bring along. And so there's a tendency to talk in their frame. You're way farther along than they are. And so when they talk, so that you aren't trying to handle all these emotional issues that are in the audience, the other audience. Does that make sense? And so they're thinking about, how do I get the slow kids to go along? And you're coming in as the wizened guy, and like, well, I'm just trying to move from my frame to this one. And you don't see what they're doing.
Right.
You don't see what they're actually doing in the background. That's how they're framing. So they're thinking like a bunch of school teachers that are trying to, get the kids to graduate from high school, so to speak. Right. And so that's part of what their frame is.
Sure.
And the second thing is the work itself.
Yeah.
So if you just talk about the work itself, that's going to be fine. But the minute you start to talk about application of the work, you're running into them being in the frame of, how do I get the kids to come along?
Oh, I see.
That makes sense. And so that's why you get this clown world stuff in the Telegram channels, etc. It's just the kids, right? You're trying to raise the kids, right? The kids are at some degree of maturity. The only thing they share in common is there's something I like here that makes sense to me. right? And so you've got this one room schoolhouse, right? Right. And it's a fucking utter chaos. And there's the kids in the back row who throw spit and chewing gum, right? I mean, spitballs and chewing gum, right? And then you got the kids in the front row who are like, quiet and listen and interject only infrequently. And they're running this vast one room schoolhouse of, a couple of thousand people, and trying to get as many people to incrementally process. And they have to do that without violating the moral intuition that's causing them to be drawn to this despite their lack of understanding it. Does that make sense? So, I mean, I just, I think, fucking Martin is unbelievable. I mean, and he does it without any emotion. And then when he makes some bit of humor, it's biased to make those kids laugh, right?
Okay.
Right. He's trying to. So as a teacher, he's freaking phenomenal, because he doesn't try to make everybody always get it right. He tries to advise everybody along their journey. And so, that's the thing about him. He has a weird humility I don't understand, because if I were him, I'd be 5 times as arrogant. He's very, very good. Luke is just as good, but it's taken a while for him to want to invest in the classroom. Brandon deals with our, Brandon is this like equivalent of our executive in charge of branding, marketing, whatever. And he's out there forming all those, or sales maybe is the right answer. He's out there forming external relationships, and he works on our strategy. I don't, right? He works on the strategic part. I don't. Luke will add, and Luke's intellectual contribution will be quite high. I'm sure that will come to light soon. And then there's just this other group of other people that have decided that their life has been fulfilled by learning, and it's like the Steve Penders of the world, or their life has been fulfilled. Won't know him. He's just, all these other guys have spun off, and they've come in, they've got to where they're comfortable, and they've spun off, because they were about their lives. They weren't about an understanding and about improving their lives. There's only a few of us that are really hyper political and that we want to implement strategic change in the world. And so, you're just trying to find those guys that can become the students and future teachers and future lawyers. And, like I've said, it's not only an IQ problem, it's a personality trait problem. Mm-hmm. If we're starting with only 3% of the population is cognitively and behaviorally, cognitively like IQ, but they're also their traits are the right. We're talking about somewhere between 1% and 3% of the population that's maximally available to us. So it's not like we can create we're sort of like the Marxists in that they actually have a bigger pool of people to draw from, because there's more midwits, right, than wits. And so the Marxists could call on the literary types, and we can't. We have to call on the analytic types. In other words, people who can do math. Like, if you look at the stuff that Michael and I talk about, it's extraordinarily, gloriously, lusciously nerdy, right? But often the other branches, we have these other people who just have different wants and needs. So I just don't think it's like us to produce, it's us to be the Darwinians, and for others to make use of the Darwinian, which is what I think you consider yourself as trying to make things happen.
Yeah, I see it as an imperative function that it's necessary to organize and act in the world, given a superior understanding of what is occurring here. It's there's no choice involved here. It's bot-like behavior.
Yes. So can I complete this little section here?
Absolutely.
Because I need to complete that, and then I need to get a cup of coffee.
Right.
Right, because we have to be serious about our coffee, and I've run out. So to finish, the point is producing all these, the logics and the grammars, etc., for first principles. And the first principles is to basically prohibit fitting. Fitting is another word for justify. Justifying is another word for making an excuse. An excuse is another word for either pretense of knowledge or deceit about knowledge. So these are,
Yeah.
So again, I want to emphasize that quite by design, P-law is procedurally identical to mathematics, at least geometry, and that there are limited, and I'm meaning a very limited set of rules of construction, meaning first principles. Just as in geometry, there's a limited number of axioms there, which is what you're talking about, a logical model. Our model is a physical operational model, so there's a limited number of laws, right? So where the first principle again means irreducible and therefore causal. In other words, these aren't in mathematics and in logic, you declare an axiom. In science, you discover a law, right? So laws pre-exist, axioms don't. That's why axioms can be flexible and laws can't. All first principles then are at all scales, whether we're talking about physical, the individual, the group, and the evolutionary, are just expressions of, or rather derivations of, the one first principle of the universe, which is stable relations produced by the capture of energy, or what we would call continuous recursive evolutionary adaptation by the incremental capture of energy in this transformation into a stable relation we call mass. This is the one law of the universe. Why that we have, I wrote this yesterday, why we call dark energy instead of dark expansionary pressure, I don't know. Why we call dark matter instead of dark gravity, I don't fucking know. But that would be the transformation of those terms into operational terms, because we don't know why the universe is under expansionary pressure. We don't know why the quantum background has the pressure it has. We make the claim that the quantum background has the same pressure at every point in space. We actually don't know that. And we just assume it because it's just the basis of our math, which is probably what's wrong, right? We don't know why, the gravity, dark gravity exists, although it's, from my understanding, it's most likely call it friction. Friction is the word's escaping me right now. In other words, it's most likely similar to Coriolis forces, right? Just at scale. In other words, there's an error in our understanding in what we're calling the quantum background, assuming that there isn't one, and it's most likely that this effect of gravity is just a natural consequence of the spin applied to the quantum background. So I mean, I don't know that's true. I just know that that's currently the most likely pair of answers, because just by operationalizing what we know about in physics so far, I would bet I'm closer to right than wrong. A lot closer to right than wrong, let's just say it that way. But I still have no idea how the universe came into being or where it'll end. I don't know that. I can say that we've identified two problems with relativity in quantum mechanics, and I know what those problems are, and they look pretty obvious to me. But how do we prove a thing where the measurement's actually impossible? I don't fucking know.
This begs a question that I must ask: is the fact that you don't know the answer to these questions, does that bother you?
No,
just asking.
Well, I mean, I'd like to know them. It's more, but it's
I really want.
Now you're fucking with me. I know what you're trying to do, and I'm not going to bite that. I'm not taking that bait.
I find it humorous. It's like this. It's like pondering the imponderable. It's like, we don't have the terms to talk about it even. So
no, it's more that you've hit on the issue, which is really good. It's
like,
more
let's talk about mathiness for a minute.
Oh, fucker. Excuse me.
It's mere fuckery.
No, I mean, but it's worth actually talking about the issue. Is it what bothers me is people making claims that aren't true,
We are in agreement.
right? It's not that,
Right. And getting grants for it.
and getting grants for it. It really bothers me. That's what bothers me, is
You're
the
agreement.
fraud,
It's
right? I don't care that we don't know. I'd love to know, but
Right. Right.
that's fun, right? That's interesting.
Right.
But that's not, so not knowing doesn't bother me. All the idiots who've created this jobs program called pseudoscience, it annoys the hell out of me.
Right. I'm gonna call it not pseudoscience, but rent-seeking fuckery. That's what it is. It's like this. It's like, hey, but I can find what you want me to find. Watch.
It's like, and the whole mathiness thing, it's like, you can't do it, but I would love to be able to produce a law that says you can't do this because it's illegal, because it's lying. And I'm like, the problem is I wouldn't know how to that's like a law. I would have to spend like 10 years figuring out how to make that law, right? It's like one of those things.
No, it's a very expensive law to make.
Well, I bet you Michael and I could do it. I bet you Michael and I could do it in 90 days if that's all we did, because you see where he's going. He's got it down. But anyway, well, Jesus Christ, you really, you just love that. I see a way to throw a wrench in Doolittle's autistic gears and get it and watch the thing spurg out.
No, it's good, man.
Laugh at it.
But what it means is that it's time to brew some coffee.
Well, okay, but then I got.
Wait, you're not done. You're not done.
I'm not done.
Oh, then finish. Then we brew the coffee.
Okay.
Sorry.
So again, there is a first principle of the universe. It's pretty obvious. It's relatively simple. It's the same principle in the universe that is in the way our language come out of our mouths, and the physical universe and language are the two ends of the spectrum. We know that's the entire spectrum that's available to human knowledge, right? I mean, so the rules of the physical universe, the rules of constructing continuous recursive disambiguation in speech are the same, right? So it's all the same across the whole spectrum, right? So it's not like it's some weird thing, it's just one fucking simple rule across the whole universe. So once we know that, that's pretty helpful. But if you have it, now you have a system of measurement. Right? We're producing a system of measurement, not a system of analogy, a system of measurement, not a system of justification, a system of falsification, not a system of making claims about what's true, but a claim about saying what's not true. Right?
All right. Are you done?
No.
Oh, okay.
You want to go off on something?
Please do. I'm like this. It's like, so you said essentially the rules of the universe. Okay. Rule and ruler is a measurement device. They're rules and it's measurement. It's about measurement. Okay, that's all. That's for the kids.
Okay. Good anchor. So this is the reason that Plaw can be taught just like we teach math and geometry, right? But and by the same method of teaching, which is just problem solving and repetition until those rules of geometry, which are stated as axioms, just become intuitions. Right? And so you know how to solve certain kinds of problems by intuition. But that's what it takes, because it's essentially a system of measurement, which is grindingly detailed, versus a system of analogy, which is a quick path from cause to consequence. And so the basic problem then is that it's easy to teach people when they haven't been already wrongly taught. So if you could teach kids this stuff, it wouldn't be all that difficult, really. I mean, it's just a couple of posters on the wall, just like grammar, right? I mean, and you can teach history by a poster on the wall. I mean, there's not much you can't teach by a poster on the wall at this point, right? And so you just put the poster on the wall, and the kids learn to use this rule for this circumstance until it's intuitive. I mean, it's great. The problem is that those have already been wrongly taught. They're trying so hard to use fitting rather than relearning.
It has to do with it's called behavioral investment.
Yes.
It's like I got my degree on the wall, and I gotta justify because I'm collecting all kind of rent here and I can't afford to release my claim because that would be just damn stupid.
Yeah. Especially if you're invested in the post-war order and you've gone to an Ivy League school and you have a job in the government somewhere, and it turns out that everything you thought, believed, and fought for was a really bad fucking idea.
Oh my. So I yes.
So,
Terrible.
and so the cost of retraining is really high on people who already have a tendency to fit. They already have a theological, philosophical, ideological, pseudoscientific or sophomoric frame that they're reliant on because as a pretense of knowledge. So these and retraining people, like taking people back to kindergarten or grade school is fucking hard, especially when they're hyper invested in it, especially if they're older. So
maybe we just have to grow a bunch instead of try to find them and retrain them. As a strategic thought process, I'll ask Brandon about it.
Well, I mean, I know, he will say that there are enough people who will get the policies to do that. There are enough people to become judges and professors available to us, right? There's a pool of large enough people, and the rest of it's just time. So I think that it's just way harder to put out Plaw than it was evolution, even though it's the same concept.
Well,
it's just
it's like there are antagonistic powers that be that are not interested in promoting the premise of it.
Right, because they've built networks of rent seeking and corruption at the expense of the ordinary people. And what we're doing is saying we're going to basically outlaw every pretense of knowledge that allows you to exploit ordinary people. I mean, that's what this does, right? We outlaw every form of corruption. Now we might call it, corruption in the sense of the entire spectrum around the triangle, right? Every means of deception, we're outlawing. Of course, they're going to hate it because once you realize that more than a fifth of the population is.
I can see them now in their cubicle. No way, that's not happening, man.
Well, I mean, the way you do it, of course, is you don't throw them out the river. You teach them. You basically put them through retraining, and I don't mean a camp.
I understand.
You say you're going to go. You're going back. You need to be certified. Like we certified financial people, we certify lawyers. If you want to work in government, you have to be certified. You're probably certifiable already, but I mean, we'll just take that out and say if you're smart enough to get to a position in government where you matter, right? If you have any discretion, you have to certify that understand natural law, right?
No, you could do it like they do the doctors, which is make them sign your what do they call it? You sign that you affirm affirmations. You make affirmations that are you're punishable for if your affirmation is false.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, though, we got to give them the knowledge to be able to. I mean, in medicine, theoretically, you've already got the.
No, but it's like, it's like no, because it's like this. You affirm that you were did something. It has nothing to do with your knowledge base. It has to do with your fitness for filing this paper, right? It's like you're affirming.
Yeah, I know. But again, all right. So I would view that as entrapment.
Yeah, I know. And it's like that's what it is. It's intentional entrapment. Yes.
Yeah, because you haven't done the due diligence of ensuring the person is capable of making the claim. In other words, the person himself can't do the due diligence of making the claim. You haven't done the due diligence of ensuring the person can make the claim. And so by putting the paper first, what you're basically doing is abusing the shit out of people by claiming they have the knowledge, right? I mean, so my view is Great, we have a certification, we have a medical certification, we have a legal certification, we have a financial certification, you need a political certification. And if you can't pass the political certification, which is, I think it's not, I don't think what we're teaching here is particularly difficult.
No.
It's certainly not as hard as Series 7. It's certainly not as hard as the law. It's basically morality. And then you can serve. If you can't, then yeah. Once you've been gone through the certified to the program, now we can withdraw your license. If you
Okay,
violate,
so you need to be a license to be a politician, is what you're saying.
yes,
I like that.
or in the bureaucracy or anywhere.
To a public servant.
Yeah, and
Oh, I see. So it's a certification of public servitude, of qualification for public service.
yeah.
Got it.
I mean, once you've done that, I mean, now you've got and of course, because we've covered the whole surface, now you've got politicians and courts and everybody who says, well, the financial sector is largely engaged in rent seeking. So unless it's speculating with its own money on production instead of rent seeking, but with its savings on citizens, then of course they're engaged in extortion. Well, if you take that away, most of the free capital now has to go to uncertainties, which will advance science, technology, production, and commons, and they will seek higher returns by local means. So we'll direct all that hedonistic consumption in the financial sector that assists the globalists in their destruction of our institutions of cultural production. It has to follow the only capital that's available to them, which is scientific, technological, and economic innovation. I just, it's like what we started saying out. We think about in terms of creating incentives. We don't think about in terms of making people, the animal man, different from how he is.
That's right. Like
Go ahead.
Men are like they are empirically and deal with it, right?
Yeah.
That's where we are.
It's like Durant says, history is the record. History is mankind rolled up for our analysis and understanding. And what he was saying is that he's, in this later age, is that there's really some very basic principles to mankind, and this is all they are. But you have Quigley and guys like me, we have guys like Huntington and McNeil, and you have, it's not that large a number of guys. Pareto tried, that generation didn't do so good, but Pareto, Durkheim, and Weber all tried. We kind of fell flat on our faces in the 20th century on everything due to this
distraction. The 20th century was a great distraction because the productivity increased so much. There was so much opportunity to exploit, and it's like just an incredible exploitation occurred. And then in addition, the political element of it was the jockeying for position among those who would be Rome, and the emperor, of course, right? And here we are at the end of the fat season's over, and the opportunity has been exhausted, right?
Yes.
We're heading to the extinction of the opportunity. So it's like, okay, now what? That's where we are. Now, are you ready for coffee?
I'm ready for coffee.
You got a plan?
Get my coffee?
You have a plan? Do you have a plan? We're going to discuss the law, I think.
As long as you've got the time for it, I'm up.
Good. We're good. Let's make some coffee and then be back in a minute.
Okay, boss.
Does that work?
Can you pause the recording?
Yes, I will. Hang on.
That week I can talk